lizards, no aliens, no nonsense. This is Reality Bytes.
So, in terms of the personnel involved in the last meeting, have you seen any big moves by any of those characters?
Well, nothing that I can nail down definitively. I have, of course, other work besides Bilderberg, lots of it sometimes, but that is one of the most significant ones recently. Of course, the matters, the plans and policies and free trade schemes that the chief Bilderberg and trilateral organizers support are coming on strong. The Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. There's other things I've reported, such as a report called Common Threads, put out by the European Parliament Liaison Office with the U.S. Congress. And I did a report called the Transatlantic Congress, and it talks about global developments that are very friendly to the Bilderberg agenda. And that is the transatlantic trade deal, the TTIP as they call it for short, carries with it, and this is pretty amazing stuff here, carries with it the common market concept that we found when the European Union was first formed in the 1950s. Of course, it wasn't called the European Union then. It was called the Common Market. The European Coal and Steel Community was the initial part of it. And now we have people like Monique Goyens, one of the spokesmen for the transatlantic trade deal, coming right out and saying this is much more than a trade deal. This is a common market. So what the globalists are trying to do here, by all indications, is use this proposed U.S. Trade deal with the European Union to merge their regulatory functions together, as they've stated themselves, and create a common market, as they've admitted themselves, following the same Bilderberg-style path that led to the formation of the European Union some 60 years ago. So this is very long-range strategic thinking going on, and it's very typical of the Bilderberg trilateral machine, where you don't always know what the individual members are doing, but you see the machine that they're building.
Yeah, I mean, any Americans looking at the European Union will probably be getting a rosy picture of it, saying this is great for jobs, this is great for the people, and all that nonsense, if you like. But most people living in Europe can see the ramifications of what the so-called European Union's brought them, and basically it's just a lower standard of living, mass immigration, the euro, the common currency, which has failed miserably. There's nothing about the European Union to brag about. So I mean, why anybody in their right mind would want to impose that on America is beyond anything I would think is common sense. But obviously there's an agenda there to bring the US into line with what's...
I'm hearing a little bit of interference, audio-wise.
I got a little bit of that. It seems to be gone now.
Okay.
I mean, America's going to go the same way as Europe if they go down the same path. I mean, have you heard any talk about a common currency between America, Canada, Mexico, or other parties even? I mean, I know the Amero was mentioned a long time ago, but that seems to have faded into the ether, as it were. Is there any talk of that?
Nothing explicit about a common currency, but as night follows day, the open talk where they're admitting that the EU-US trade deal is much more than a trade deal and that it's about a common market. Common market rolls off the tongue. The next thing to roll off the tongue logically, if history is any teacher, would be a common currency. And you're absolutely right, Neil. The Amero is sort of already a museum item on the globalist shelves. It hasn't been talked about openly in a number of years. There's been some obscure International Monetary Fund papers written, white papers, how they call them, that have talked about, well, maybe special drawing rights through the IMF would be the de facto world currency. And that's popped up from time to time over the last couple of decades at least. But yeah, you're absolutely spot on. No open talk about common currency yet, but once they start talking common market, common currency would not be far off, but they've got a ways to go because they've got to get this TTIP, this EU-US trade deal, either through or steer it around our Congress and try and keep the people and their Congress as far away from it as possible.
Yeah, I mean, we have the likes of George Soros saying the European Union's failed. It makes you wonder if they're pushing for a more global system in terms of another currency. Maybe they're going to really push for a global currency rather than go down the route of for the American Union, if you like, and the euro for the European Union. Maybe they'll just go for one currency for the whole lot. Who knows?
That very well could be true. Another thing that they don't talk about as openly anymore, besides the Amero, is the idea of a North American Union. And I think the reason is because that aroused too much opposition. The NAFTA highway here, known in Texas as the Trans-Texas Corridor, it's a major highway network, really various arteries of super wide highways that would ship Chinese and Asian-made goods from Pacific Ocean ports in Mexico and then up north through rail and highway networks up into North America and Canada. And at the same time that that's been discussed over the last few years, the North American Union, or NAU, and the Amero were all on everyone's tongue. All of a sudden, all that went silent, except for some of that highway stuff, which is suspicious in itself. You know, it's like a chorus is singing, and all of a sudden there's no more music to hear, however sour the notes might be. And so I think they aroused too much opposition, and so now they're talking in broader terms or not talking at all, just keeping it quiet. And they're trying, as you know, Neil, they're trying to expand the Eurozone by hook or crook, even though that currency is largely a failure. So they're concentrating on the Eurozone. They don't want that to shrink. They want it to grow. They're keeping quiet about a international or global currency. But as noted, they're pushing forward this transatlantic trade deal and this common market. So they received some pushback. They lost a little bit of ground, but now they're trying to recover lost ground.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about them expanding in Eastern Europe, or Europe in general. I regularly have driven across Eastern Europe and going through Serbia, and you see signs up there for European Union funded projects, and they're not in the European Union or the Euro. And
wow.
all these projects seem to be major road infrastructure and crossing into like Bulgaria next door.
That's curious. Road infrastructure, just like I was talking about these NAFTA superhighways over here, these free trade autobahns, not NAFTA autobahns as they're called. That's very interesting, Neil, that they would have promotion in areas that are not even part of either the Eurozone or the EU, and to promote that's very interesting.
Well, again, Montenegro, I think it is, that uses the euro, and they're not in the European Union either. So I don't know how that came about. But I mean, you drive across Serbia, and the roads are excellent because they were all bombed during the Balkan War and then rebuilt. But yeah, they've got these. They tend to be the pillars for bridge infrastructure, and that's all that's there. And this little bit of road going between the two of them, but the main roads aren't yet built. It's just all the kind of crossovers that they're putting up to begin with, and then I'm sure the money will flood in there when they get into the European Union, because their neighbours are in there now, Croatia, and Hungary above them is in. So I mean, and Bulgaria to the other side, and Romania, they're all in there already. So I mean, they're basically surrounded by the European Union anyway.
Correct.
Logically, they're next, and I don't see it being too long before that happens, really.
Yeah, I forget. Without looking, I did Estonia join the Eurozone?
I think they did. I think you might be right there. I can't recall.
Yeah, I believe they were one of the ones that was on tap. Yeah, the whole European establishment, and I'm not saying anything against Europe in general. I've been there. I enjoy being there. I enjoy being in the UK, where I met you for Bilderberg 2013. The people of Europe, I think, are fine people all in all, and as they are in America, it's this 1% or this 1% of the 1% that's spoiling the stew here. And it's not that connections between the U.S. and Europe are necessarily all bad by definition. It's the fact that this is all done so semi-secretly, secretly, behind closed doors, although they put out slick press publications that make it look like there's openness and transparency, but it's not real openness and transparency. Something I came across covering Washington think tanks for American Free Press, that's AmericanFreePress.net, is a report called Common Threads. I'm holding it in my hand. Strengthening Transatlantic Bonds and Values by the European Parliament Liaison Office with the U.S. Congress. And here we have what appears to be the makings, Neil, of a transatlantic Congress, along with this common market I spoke of that could lead to a common currency. The booklet, this report, contains EU and U.S. comparisons, and it even has members of the European Parliament who have partners in the United States Congress. And they're beginning to share political ideas and basic political policy premises and foundations. And they talk about the transatlantic bond that was mentioned by Donald Tusk this week when, of course, he became the new European Council president. And he got on the phone right away December 1st with President Obama and talked about the transatlantic bond. And what he means is what I'm talking about here, the idea that the European Union and the U.S. legislators and the executive branches can actually start creating formal bonds, not simply associating, not simply communicating, but going beyond that and forging a common market. And I think this Common Threads report that I picked up a couple months ago in Washington lays the foundation for that.
Well, of course, with the common market and the common currency came the European Parliament. I mean, are we seeing the grounds being prepared for some kind of transatlantic governmental body, do you think?
Yes, I believe that that's what this is. I'm not going to say that with absolute definitiveness. In other words, I'll withhold some judgment, but all the indications are that this strengthening of transatlantic bonds and values is the beginning of a common political entity along with that common market. And that would, again, fit the Bilderberg mold, wouldn't it? Because they always lay the economic, infrastructure or architecture first. The economics is laid first, to be followed closely by the political entity. And this is probably, by all indications, a major outcome of Bilderberg planning since 1954, and then the Trilats came along in 73. But another group that's been around since at least 1960 is the Atlantic Council. And not long after John Kerry rather secretively slipped into the Trilateral Commission meeting in Washington back in April of this year, right after that, he went to the somewhat more transparent Atlantic Council meeting and announced similar things to what we're talking about here in very general and vague terms, but especially he was lashing out against Vladimir Putin, who now is the devil incarnate according to the Western establishment. And whatever one may think of Putin, I do not feel any more comfortable around these Western wonks that are stumping for these transatlantic secretive ties while acting as if it's being done more or less openly. It's a lot of sleight of hand, it's a lot of fakery going on, and a lot of deception going on. And so that's what's coming to the fore. There's a lot of scary things happening because when it comes to Putin and Ukraine, the Western establishment just insists that Petro Poroshenko is the very face of democracy, which is just laughably untrue. And that's something that regular Western and European news consumers need to come to grips with. Vladimir Putin may not be a saint, but Petro Poroshenko is bad news if there ever was bad news. And this is something that we've got to get out there.
Yeah, well, of course, we're told that Obama and Cameron are the epitome of democracy as well. And as you say, I mean, why have a go at Putin when we've got our own skeletons in the closet in their own countries? And,
oh my goodness! Yes.
I mean, as you say, this is following the same model as the European Union followed. That well, it's going to be great for the people. It's going to be great for jobs, the economies, and look at the state of it. I mean, it clearly hasn't worked, and yet they're pushing ahead with this in America. I mean, you would imagine that American people would be looking at Europe and go, hold on a minute, look what's happened over there. Why would we have anything to do with this? But as you say, it's all done under the rug, as it were, sleight of hand, and basically a pack of lies.
Yeah, one of the lies, there's so many lies, Neil, and you make a great point, a pack of lies, that you could sum up the entire discussion today with those 3 or 4 words, a pack of lies. One of them is this notion of free trade, just the very idea of it. These globalists actually believe that you can export your way to prosperity. Now, anybody with real brains would understand that trade works better when you have national-based economies with strong local economies, and a nation only exports those surpluses that it can't consume itself. Any nation that can feed itself should feed itself and need not import much, if any, food. Any nation that can equip itself with machinery and capital goods and whatnot should do so and not be overly dependent on imports, and again, only export surpluses. Jim Tucker, my former Bilderberg mentor, used to say that the U.S. only needs to import pineapple, coffee, and bananas. And that's humorous, but there's a degree of truth to it. And so, the whole free trade model is, okay, we don't have enough purchasing power in our home country, so we need to open up other markets, and so people can use their wallets and their purses to buy our goods in another country. Well, it'd be a lot better just to improve your own economic situation where your home consumers in your domestic country can be your chief, buyers of the nation's goods, and you only export the surpluses. But the free traders force us into exporting on an arbitrary basis, whether we need to or not, getting us to believe that we can export our way to prosperity. The whole thing is just it's meaningless nonsense, and that's being kind.
Well, I mean, if we look at Africa as an example, there's a country that needs all the food that it can produce, and yet it's forced to export it to pay off debts. I mean, we're almost kind of getting to that stage where the only thing we seem to be exporting is jobs to other countries. That's about it. I mean, and we're importing cheap labour to do the jobs that were there all the time for the indigenous peoples to do. And I'm sick of hearing. I'm sick of hearing the fact that British people don't want to do these jobs, American people don't want to do these jobs. Well, of course they do. They just can't. They're not allowed to, because the wages are driven down to such a level that the only people that can actually survive are immigrants, and they live in 5 and 6, 10 to a house or whatever. And I mean, who wants to live like that? I'm sure they don't even want to live like that, but they're forced to, just to get by.
Exactly. Yeah, all those points are very salient. And another thing you can add to that is that like in the United States, one of the main reasons that Mexicans and Central Americans come here thinking the U.S. streets are paved with gold, where they get that notion is beyond me. But one of the reasons they do is economic dislocation. The North American Free Trade Agreement and the Central American deal have hurt the Central American and Mexican economies so badly that they feel they have no choice but to flee here. So these trade deals also cause this mass migration and this dislocation. In the absence of these trade deals, many Mexicans would try and make it work in their home country, and we wouldn't have as much of an immigration problem here. And I suspect that's an issue in Europe too, although there may be other variables, of course, that we probably don't have time to get into today. But the dislocations and the distortions are endless. As you say, the debt-based money system that needs to be replaced with sovereign, non-usurious systems, systems where money is created without debt. That debt-based money system forces these debts on the countries, and then, as you said, Neil, it creates this paradox where nations export food that they need to feed themselves, and then we wonder why there's starvation in Africa. And why doesn't Bono of U2 grab onto that? Maybe he needs to take his glasses off so he can see more clearly all these leftist and, starry-eyed activists at the World Economic Forum that think they're going to solve the world's problems. They don't even face up to the problems, let alone solve them. They don't know what they're talking about.
Well, Bono is part of the problem.
Sure.
I mean, he's running a charity called One, and I think about 1%, it was reported in the mainstream media, about 1% of the money actually goes to the people that need it, and fat salaries and brown envelopes go to other people.
Correct.
And all these U2 paraphernalia, all that, all the T-shirts and everything are made in sweatshops in China. So he enjoys free trade, all right, but it's not very good for the Chinese. But
Right.
this thing about migration, the UK has been pushed for decades and decades as a land of milk and honey, and mass immigration, particularly in I'd say the bottom third of England, is a disaster. I mean, you go to London, you go to any of the cities around with the M25, which is a big motorway which goes around the Greater London area. I think it's only 40% indigenous people there now. And most of the people that have come as immigrants can't get jobs anyway because there are none. And it's just, there were rules in place apparently that nobody could come from outside the EU and take a job inside the EU unless there was nobody in the EU that could do it. And yet you go into Shell gas stations in the UK and they're all staffed by Indians. All of them.
Yes. So much could be said about that. For one thing, especially in the U.S., and it probably happens over there, the regular citizens of the U.S. and Britain, sorry, I'll call them white, I'll use that forbidden word white, Anglo-American, whatever you want to call them, do not hate foreigners. The English and American political establishments, of course, if you talk about anything other than totally open borders, they imply that we hate everything and everyone. Every walking person that isn't like us, we simply hate them, hate seething out our pores. Of course, that's, Cameron and Obama's, fallback position. They don't know what they're talking about. They never have, never will. But beyond that, they push this notion of open borders, even though they may talk tough once in a while, where they just, throw all cultures in a blender and push the on button. The fact that doesn't work apparently doesn't occur to them, but it's not really immigration per se that's the problem, as you know, Neil. It's unchecked, unregulated, full-bore open borders where there's no time or no jobs or no way for people to assimilate into the host culture. So they leave their domestic cultures. They go to places like Britain and the U.S., thinking the streets are paved with gold. They're sold a bill of goods. We're sold a bill of goods. And you get the feeling that the cultures are being played off each other by people in a higher echelon.
Well,
and I think
that's certainly the case in the UK, where the media for at least the last 3-4 years has really been pushing the race issue. Everything, on the one hand they'll say, oh, we've got to welcome other cultures, we've got to be multicultural, Muslims are lovely people, and then on the other hand they're over in they're over in Syria bombing them, because they're evil, and then,
yes.
and we're told that they're all going to come to Britain and cause terror attacks and all the rest of it. Look out, report something, see something, say something, all this nonsense, And I worked for many Muslims when I was in the UK as a painter and decorator. And I used to go down to where they had all their shops because they had better food, and I used to buy stuff from them, and I had no problem with it whatsoever. But as I say, I lived in Turkey. I lived in a Muslim country, and I had no trouble there either. And I've never met a terrorist. I've never met somebody who wanted to cut my head off. Purely for being from the UK, and vice versa. I've never had any strife with anybody from another country. And I've been there a few. I've never had any problem with anybody. And as you say, it's ordinary people are ordinary people everywhere. We all kind of get on if we can get past the language barrier. We're all fundamentally the same people. We may have different religions or values or whatever, but we're all fundamentally the same creatures, as it were, and we can all get along. It's just when you've got these lunatics at the top, like Cameron, Obama, and whatever tin pot dictators put in place, that's when we have the trouble. I mean, people themselves, ordinary people, don't go to war. They're sent. You ask any ordinary person in the street if they want to go to war. I guarantee it'd be 100% no. I wonder how many politicians you'd ask who would say no. You know.
Yeah. What you're saying is so true. And the early founders of America, like Jefferson and others, would talk about this. Washington, that people will generally get along. It's governments that create the conditions for and the policies toward war and enact them. And then they go screaming at the regular people like you and I and so many others like us, calling us haters, calling us bigots. They're the haters. They're the bigots. They accuse everyone of the very things they are guilty of. And that would be Cameron, Obama, Tony Blair, that guy. His compass doesn't even point north. And, these are the people that stir up the hatred and then push the blame onto others. The Muslims and the Central Americans and the Americans and the UK regular citizens, we all need to come together in a sense, not be forced together through these tin pot dictators' policies, but come together, think together to realize we're being played.
Well, I went to a meeting in Luton in an Islamic centre, and they're holding a meeting on the war against Islamophobia, right? And I stood up and asked one of the presenters, I says, why are you using the word Islamophobia? Because that's an irrational fear of Islam. I don't think anybody in here has an irrational fear of Islam, so what are you talking about? And I said to one of them later on, I said, you guys are part of the problem. You're stirring up trouble. You're making these young Muslim guys in here believe that everybody out there who isn't a Muslim is against them.
Right.
And you're doing it deliberately.
Right.
And they wouldn't answer the question, of course. But I mean, the word Islamophobia means an irrational fear of Islam. Well, I don't know anybody who's got that. If you've got a fear of Islam, it's a rational one because it's been put in your mind that they're all evil. So it's not irrational.
And some of this can be traced to the think tanks, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilaterals, to some extent the Bilderbergers, and so many others in that alphabet soup world of think tanks on both sides of the pond. Years ago, they've been touting, 4 years, I should say, they've been touting the clash of civilizations. Islam is coming. They all want to chop your heads off. They want to put you under Sharia law. And this is not to say that there aren't radical elements in Islam. There are things that are disagreeable about it philosophically, but by and large, this is all just the hatred and the distrust created by our respective political and economic establishments who profit from and advance with engendering this kind of hatred and distrust. All that being said, though, the open-ended, open borders policies need to be set back because that plays a physical role, a tangible role in shoving us all against each other and having us blame each other instead of looking to these ivory tower tyrants who are, fostering all of this. And so, immigration controls are necessary, stricter ones, that is, but they're not the total answer.
No, absolutely not. Okay, we've only got a couple of minutes left of your time, Mark. What do you see, if anything, on the agenda for next year's Bilderberg?
Well, I think it's a little early to tell. I was a little surprised to learn when I did, and it was a front page story in American Free Press, that we already kind of had a handle on where they're meeting, which seems to be in Austria. Briefly, it came so early that we have to be a little suspicious of whether it will actually be in Austria, in the area of Austria called Tyrol, or Tyrol.
The Tyrol, it's called.
Tyrol, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for correcting my sophomoric pronunciation there. I appreciate that. But I think we're going to see at least something generally related to these common threads and this internationalist kind of common market between the U.S. and the EU. They're going to want to get these trade deals passed, Trans-Pacific and Transatlantic. So some elements that would help these along, plus the Ukrainian question, that was on Bilderberg's agenda for 2014 in Denmark, although their agenda items that they put out in their so-called press releases are so pitifully general and so incomplete and so without detail that they're almost useless. And one has to wonder if the press releases put out by the so-called Bilderberg media outlet have any validity at all. And so, but this transatlanticism, if I may coin a word, certainly is highly likely to be there in some way, shape, or form along with those trade deals.
And I'm sure there'll be another few facets which will all kind of mould around that kind of concept, which will be the stepping stones towards it, I'm sure. Okay, Mark, well, thanks again for your time. I know you're a busy man, and maybe we'll have you on again in a couple of months' time to get a little bit of an update and see if there's anything else on the agenda that you've discovered.
I appreciate it, Neil, and you made some very good points. I'll just close with, I saw an article in the Canadian outlet, Global Research, that pretty well-respected outlet, and U.S. and European policy among the leaders, that is, to support Poroshenko at all costs, threatened to drag the U.S. and much of Europe into a very needless and dangerous conflict with a nuclear-armed Russia. And Russia, of course, is not depleted like the U.S. forces are from trying to patrol the entire globe nonstop. The U.S. is fighting overtly or covertly. The U.S. is fighting wars on some 6 or 7 fronts right now, none of them declared by Congress in the constitutional way, all of them without end, all of them without any known objective, nor can victory be defined, much less be achieved, at least from the knowledge of the regular populace. And so we really need to watch NATO and the U.S. arming and helping Petro Poroshenko, who I'll mention real briefly to wind up here. I covered Congress back in September when Poroshenko spoke to Congress, both houses of the U.S. Congress, and it was a pitiful 40-minute long, 20-page speech begging the Congress for money and war material and any and all support, because don't you know, Poroshenko is just such a democratic guy and Putin's just such a bad guy and the universe is just so simple. And so that's the real hot spot, the real powder keg right now among all these other issues.
Yeah, and you talk about the American troops being depleted, as are the UK troops, and I said it a few years ago. I think we're only a couple of riots away from conscription to reinforce those troops. But maybe I'm wrong, but who knows? Okay, thanks, Mark, and we'll talk to you again.
Thanks, Neil. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, take care. Thank you.
Sure.
Cheers.